CommitToWealth.com, creating a legacy by committing to real estate wealth.
Commit to Wealth Nation, welcome to the Commit to Wealth podcast. I'm your host, Juan Vargas, and we have another awesome guest today. Her name is Dominique Moss. So Dominique is a highly regarded transformational coach who helps high achievers and high performers develop, transform, and reflect on their personal and professional lives. Originally from France, she has lived and worked in Europe, Asia, and the US, and holds a master's degree in educational leadership and change, and is an ICF certified coach who trained with the Neuro Leadership Institute. So Dominique, welcome to the Commit to Wealth podcast.
Hi, thank you. Really happy to be here.
Hey, it is a pleasure to have you on. And so I want everybody to kind of understand what today's podcast episode is really about, right? So it is something different that we're going to do today. We're not going to necessarily talk about real estate per se, but we are going to discuss how and where she can provide value for us. And for those of us that are listening, maybe you are working full-time today, but you want maybe transform into a full-time job, right? Where you are doing real estate full-time, right? Or maybe you are already in real estate, doing multifamily, doing commercial real estate, and you kind of have some moments of doubt, or there's some roadblocks that you kind of encounter here and there. And she's going to help us get through those kind of things, and we'll go through some of those questions. But before we get there, I want to ask you, Dominique, who is Dominique Moss, and tell us a little bit about your background and who you are.
Yeah, thank you. So I think you mentioned I'm originally from France, and I actually trained as a leader in education. So I worked in educational leadership for 15 years, worked with high-performing students, and I was coaching teachers in schools. And 2 years ago, I made a huge transition to actually create my own coaching practice. So I know quite a bit about transition and shifting from a full-time job to doing your own thing. And today I'm very happy. I'm very happy to do what I'm doing. I'm so happy that I made the jump to actually create a life for myself that is more reflective of what's meaningful to me and gives me a lot more time to do the things that I love. So I hope that I can help perhaps some of your listeners make that change as well, make that jump.
Definitely. So Dominique, let's start off by who is your ideal client, that you work with, right? So we're listening, want to know who is it, the kind of person that you can help, right?
Absolutely. I work with people who are very high performers. So in terms of their career, they've had a very successful career already, they're established, and they're usually people who are very motivated, very driven. They tend to be highly creative. They want to do everything. Most of the time they want to do it yesterday, and they probably want to do it alone as well. They have a lot of creativity and a lot of capacity for pretty much everything. So they're able to give a lot of their time to their work, to their family. They're very resilient as well. So I work more with the psychographic I just described rather than a demographic. I work with men, women, different ages. Although most of the people I tend to work with are mid to late 30s and over, I would say.
Okay. So if they are high performers, high achievers, and they're just crushing it in their professional lives, their personal lives, you name it, then why would they reach out to somebody like you?
That's a great question. They have a lot of challenges. So I work with two different ways, if you like, of working with people. One, some of them are looking to transition to a completely different life. And it can be very, very hard when you've been driven by one single goal your whole life, and suddenly you're in front of a blank slate and you're not sure what's going on. So we work on creating that new life, what you actually want to do, what's meaningful to you, what you need to step away from. And on the other hand, I work with people who are not necessarily in transition, but their challenges are very much around slowing down. So while they do have all the grit and the resilience, a lot of them end up burning out because they're not slowing down and they're not taking care of themselves. So there's a lot of burnout. there's a lot of wanting to achieve really high, and where their standard, if you like, is everyone's very high achievement. So people tend to really admire them, and people tend to be very inspired by them, and yet inside they tend to feel lazy, right? They're like, well, I know everyone thinks I'm doing all these things, but for me it's not that hard. And so they work with me to truly challenge themselves. How, when you already are at this level, how do you get out of your comfort zone? How do you truly push yourself even further? So we work on that aspect as well. And believe it or not, confidence, because we're human, right? And the human experience comes with self-doubt. That's what happens. So we also work a lot on confidence. And when that moment comes of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, how do you remind yourself that you are a capable human being and that you can actually do it?
Makes sense. So your conversation right now, or your example, kind of brought up something from another example that I came across recently, and this was actually Navy SEALs, and you know, maybe you don't work with, you know, ex-military or not, but you know, these are like Navy SEALs, Green Berets, you know, guys that have been at the highest level. You know, they have no fear, like in their natural abilities, right? Natural abilities, their natural environment, right? Because that's what they've been trained for. And then they come into the civilian world, and you know, everything's different, right? So now all of a sudden your skill sets are not necessarily, I wouldn't say useful, but they're not going to be as used, you know, in the civilian world. And so you went from a position to where everybody was looking up to you. Hey, oh my God, you're a Navy SEAL, you're a Green Beret, you're you know, special forces. And then you come into the civilian world, and you can't use your skill sets anymore. And now you have to kind of start from the very bottom. And so I guess, you know, mentally that's very challenging for those type of guys. So I would say it's something similar to the kind of clients that you work with, right?
100%. You know, the way I describe what you just talked about is I always say you're going from being an expert to being a novice, basically. Mm-hmm. You go from, you're absolutely right, from that knowledge of your field and being admired to finding yourself confronted with that blank slate and not really knowing where to start or how to identify the skills that you can transfer from your previous career. And that creates a lot of anxiety, that creates a lot of self-doubt, issues with imposter syndrome, trying to work out, well, what am I good for in this world, right? And there's also that sense of being taken out of a world that you know so well, and suddenly it's like landing in a new country when you're traveling, right? You go somewhere that you've never been before, everything is new, and you feel that you have to watch everything, you have to look at everything, you have to relearn how to behave, and that's really, really hard. That's really hard.
It is. So, you know, what are some of those challenges? Like you just said right now, I guess, you know, anxiety is something that people have to deal with, self-doubt, you know, maybe depression, you know, you know, so can you maybe touch on some of those, you know, different challenges, and, you know, and discuss how maybe, you know, just a little bit deeper and how you can help, you know, each one of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take the self-doubt, for example, because I think that's something that comes up a lot. And for some of your listeners who might be wanting to transfer, it's good to be prepared and thinking, okay, I know that this is going to happen. So one exercise that I like to do is write down one sentence that actually reflects the fear that the self-doubt is bringing out. So it might be something like, I'm afraid I'm going to fail. I'm afraid people are not going to look up to me anymore, right? So it's really, what is it that one sentence that sums up exactly what the fear is? And once you've got that, start to question this fear, start to question this belief. And in order to do that, you can list 3 to 5, I always aim for 5 or more, pieces of evidence or reasons that this might not actually be true. So where you might think, I'm afraid of failing, you've just been really successful in a previous career and you have not failed. So that's one, right? You've always got feedback from people that you are doing amazing things. That's two. So list the pieces of evidence that show, okay, I have achieved so much in my previous lives. There's absolutely no reason that I might fail. And then once you've done that, choose another statement that's actually going to serve you. So, and I like to base that around a growth mindset. So really thinking, okay, you know what, I might not be an expert in this new field, but I'm here to learn and I have the capacity to learn. So create a statement around that, around learning, around growth, and around the process of becoming the person that you want to become. And once you've got that new statement, start to think of ways that you can incorporate that in your new routine, in your new life. And the main reason for that is when we try to change habits, when we try to change our life, right, the way we live, there are three things that are absolutely key. And the first one is awareness. So by creating that first statement, you're creating awareness around that habit that you have of going down the route of, oh, I can't do this. The second thing that's really important is positive reinforcement. So by creating those pieces of evidence, listing your previous achievements, you can see, I actually have a lot of worth. I have value. I've done these things. So you're giving yourself that positive reinforcement. And the third thing that's really important is repetition. So by creating opportunities for yourself to behave in that way, you're bringing up that repetition. So awareness, repetition, and positive reinforcement. Those are the three things that are really going to help you and together to create a lot of confidence. And there's one thing that I always say is that courage comes before confidence, right? When we think back to anything new, I'm sure when you first started the podcast, you had doubts about the way you might interview people, and now it's just what you do. It's normal. So that has come from having the courage to actually start and do it, and then repetition and doing it and doing it.
That is so true. It really does start with courage, and it's that fear that you have to get through. And
right.
One of the things I always say is you got to just punch fear in the face. And if it's something that's inside of you, you're getting nervous, your heart's beating fast, and that's because there's some kind of fear, right? You're nervous, you get some anxiety. That's because of fear. Ultimately, it's because of fear. And the only way, or the best way to kind of get through is to face it head on. And then just attack it, and then you realize you went through it, and it's like that wasn't that big of a deal at the end. It really wasn't. It was just me, thinking and self-doubting myself that I wasn't going to be good enough. It wasn't going to be the perfect situation or the results or whatever. And you realize that it wasn't that bad.
For some people, it's really hard to just go at it and face the fear head on. So what I would say is if that seems impossible to you, then maybe what you can do is break it down a little bit and try things out in a context that's risk-free. So maybe it's starting to tell your friends, I'm going to start doing this instead of what I've been doing. So that there's not going to be any judgment. So start doing it in a context where you're going to get some support, and then that's going to build a bit of confidence, and then start taking it outside where it's really scary.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. So what are some of those strengths, that can also be something that holds them back, right? So, go ahead and discuss, some of those strengths that some of these high performers, high achievers, have that, you have to deal with as well.
Yeah, and I think I was trying to think of what would be really helpful for your audience, and I think one of the biggest thing that comes up is the idea of being extremely creative and wanting to try to do everything, wanting to try to do every project. And when you start something new, or I'm sure for some of your established investors, you can't do everything. So prioritizing and choosing the projects that will be either meaningful to you or helpful or really fit in with your bigger goal, those are the projects that you want to prioritize and commit to. So I think wanting to do everything is one of those trends that's amazing, because it opens so many doors and so many opportunities, and yet it's holding a lot of people back because they end up, if you like, spreading their energy around so many different things. So I think prioritizing and making sure that you channel the energy that you have for everything into maybe one or two projects that are actually going to be the ones that you know are going to be helpful is one. Another thing that I think will be really helpful, especially for those who are looking to transition, is think about asking for help. And when you're a high performer, you tend to want to do everything yourself. And it's a strength, right? It's a strength. You're self-reliant, so you can pretty much do everything by yourself. You don't really need help. You like to learn. You can go and find information on the internet. So people the clients that I work with tend not to ask for help. And yet, especially when we're starting something new, to find someone who can perhaps be a mentor to you, to find someone who has experience in the field, will simplify your life 100 times. It's ever so worth it. So I think pushing yourself to ask for help can be ever so helpful.
So is it fair to say? Is it fair to say that some of these clients may have like a huge ego, right? So if you have a huge ego, then you feel that
Definitely.
It may be true that you can accomplish so much and by yourself, right? Where without very little assistance, you're just one of those just a huge action taker. But because of the results of that, you also have been have built a huge ego, and you're like, I don't want to ask for help, because if I ask for help, then I'm putting myself at a lower level than what I'm really at, than where I feel that I'm at. So I would say that's maybe the case.
Definitely. And unfortunately, when you're starting from scratch, it's actually not unfortunately, but when you're starting from scratch, it's necessary, right, to get input from those who've had experience. And I think everyone whom I challenge to ask for help, because it's a challenge. So I usually say, your challenge for this week is to ask 3 people for help, and people gasp. And the finding is always, wow, people do want to help. People really want to help, and it was great. It gave me so much. We're human creatures, right? We're social creatures. We're meant to be social and to learn from each other. That's why we have the expression, it takes a village, right? We're supposed to learn from each other. So I think really pushing yourself to go and ask for help will be really, really helpful. And I have one more that I think is really important to highlight. And that's probably the biggest one that goes along with all the others, is commitment to success. Because whether you're an ex-Navy SEAL, whether you are someone who's built an incredible career in corporate, or even perhaps by yourself, or been a founder and had tremendous success, you're committed to that success. And that's an incredible gift, because it means that you're out there, you're always moving forward, you have so much intrinsic motivation, you can build community, and people are very proud of that. The problem that comes with it often is that they need to feel in control of everything. And sometimes when you're starting something new, you can't be in control of everything, because you don't know what you don't know yet. And you might be held back by not asking for help, and by a really deep fear of judgment, both from themselves and from others, because they're so used to achieving at a certain level that suddenly when you're not there, it can be really hard. So this often translates into unrealistic expectations and underestimating the time or effort that it might take to achieve the success they want in the new field. And so I think just being aware of that, just knowing that it might take a little longer than you expected, and it's okay. Like, just knowing that is important, I think. Understanding that the success you've built before took 10 years, 20 years to build in your previous career, right? You didn't just start and be successful. So it's looking back and thinking, okay, I need to give myself a bit of a break here. I'm doing good. I'm good. The fact that you chose to change your life is already such a testament to your commitment to success and to doing what's important to you. So give yourself a little credit.
Give yourself some credit, yes. So what about dealing with stress, because, being a high performer, being a high achiever, and it does take a toll on you if you're doing things on a constant, daily basis.
Yeah.
There's going to be some stress, right?
Yeah.
And so how can somebody, deal with that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're absolutely right. It comes with the territory of being a high performer. And so I always like to say that it's important to realize that stress often comes from a feeling that we're not in control of the situation. So in order to manage our stress, we have to regain control of the situation. So the first thing to do is really to build awareness, to understand that we're stressed. There's a process called the general adaptation syndrome that someone called Hans Seilet talks about, and it's really 3 different phases. And the first one is the resistance phase. So we adapt, we cope, we do what needs to be done, and we don't realize that we're actually gradually being depleted and that our energy is just starting to dwindle away. And that leads eventually to burnout. So if in that first phase of resistance, of adaptation, we can build some awareness, then we're much more able to manage that stress. So one way to do that could be every day, maybe 3 times a day at different times, take a pen and paper and write down, how am I feeling right now? Just take 1 minute to pause and realize, am I stressed? Is my heart beating fast? Am I thinking of 5,000 things at the same time and not actually doing anything? Take a breath and pause. And just doing that, it'll take a minute out of your day maybe, and it'll allow you to, take a breath, take a breath and slow down. So building that awareness is really important. The next thing that I always say is, throughout the day, build tiny little ways to replenish your energy. So we start in the morning with that much energy in our bank account, right? I call it a bank account of energy. And we do things, and our energy gets taken away. But if once in a while we can stop and replenish a little bit, then we can move down. So simple ways that we can do that is, give yourself a break, a mental break, and maybe watch a 1-minute funny video or something like that. It takes you away from your work and it replenishes your mental energy. It could be go for a short walk, or simply think of someone you really like, or you haven't seen for a while. Send them a text message, send them a quick video message. Hey, how you doing? It sounds so simple, and yet it changes the balance of our chemicals, right? It's like, oh, I just thought of Juan. Let me send him a quick message. Hey, man, how you doing? Immediately you're smiling. You're thinking of something different. Bang, you're getting a little bit of energy. So it doesn't have to be go to the gym every day, although that's great. I'm not saying don't do it. But it doesn't have to be such a big deal. It can be little things that you do every day. So building an awareness routine and having recovery time planned in your routine is super important. And the last thing I'll say around that is, if you think of an athlete, they don't perform at 100% all the time, right? They have recovery time built in their training. It's the same with us as humans in our work. We can't be at 100% all the time. So find ways to build in recovery time. And maybe it's doing tasks that are menial tasks that don't require so much energy. Each day, spend a half hour, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes tidying up your desk, for example. But you can't be at 100% all the time. It's going to catch up with you, and that energy is just going to get to the lower level, and that's when we end up burning out.
So what would you say will be the best way for, you just talked about like maybe, taking those few breaks throughout the day, to try to replenish that energy to like that you can be hyper focused, right? Because it's very important. But then how do you kind of prevent somebody from maybe taking too long of a break, where they're not managing their time properly now, because, that's also very important. How is it?
100%.
Yeah, right. You can't be productive if you're like just dozing off, and being on the internet, just watching videos too much, right?
Totally.
So what's the strategy there?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's what I was saying. Like, watch a 1 minute video, not a half hour episode of Archer.
Yeah.
But I think it's really about, for me, what's really worked and what's been working a lot for my clients is planning. So know that you're going to plan, for example, for these 2 hours, I'm going to be hyper focused on this task, and then I'm going to take a 5-minute break. And during that 5-minute break, you can do whatever, go for a coffee, text a friend, whatever it is. Then I'm going to have an hour and a half of really focused time on this. Then I'm going to eat my lunch, and then I'm going to do this. So it's really about planning your time so that you know exactly what you're focusing on. And in terms of the way our brain works, having specific goals for specific amounts of time is actually a really good way to make sure that we stay productive. So knowing, okay, for this next hour, this is my task, and then I've got 5 minutes. But I think creating a calendar for yourself is a really, really good way of managing that.
So creating that calendar, like having maybe a reminder, how would you say that it would be best for somebody to make it like a permanent part of their daily lives, right? So I think those will help. Sometimes people maybe, and I know this may not be necessarily what you focus on, maybe necessarily time management, but how would you make sure that people like are for sure making it like a permanent part of what they do, and not just ignoring those reminders or ignoring that they have something else, another task to do, and just to be high level. Right?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of times what we need to do is start to build new habits, right? And I think the important thing to understand here is if we want to adopt a new behavior, we have to give it effort. We have to actually pay attention to it. So creating a new routine takes, as I said earlier, it takes attention, it takes repetition. So one thing that I've advised people to do, and I do it for myself, I keep looking over there because that's where my plan for the day is every night before I finish my work, I write down, this is what I'm going to do tomorrow. And I always leave about an hour in the day for unforeseen, things that might happen. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So building that routine of doing that, for some people, it's easier to do a weekly plan. So every Monday morning, they're going to sit down and take an hour and just create their prioritizing tasks or create their list of priorities. So I think it's really important to find the time that works for you as an individual. When is a good time for you to start prioritizing? Is it first thing in the morning every day? Is it once a week? But creating a routine of doing that is the first step. And once you've done that, is really reminding yourself that there's a reason you're changing this behavior. Reminding yourself of the why. And when you catch yourself, and that's the key, when you catch yourself not doing it, reminding yourself, oh, no, I have to go back. So that fraction of a second when you realize, hey, I'm not following my plan, go back to it. Don't give yourself a chance to cheat yourself of that, because it's going to make a difference. But in order to get there, I go back to those three things. You got to pay attention to it. So you've got to know when you're not doing it. You got to give it repetition. You got to keep doing it so it becomes a habit. And you've got to give yourself positive reinforcement. So every time you do stick to your plan, it's a little, maybe it's just looking at yourself in the mirror and telling yourself how awesome you are. Or maybe it's, a little drink of water, but a little reward, whatever that might look like for you as an individual.
That makes sense. So for everybody listening out there, that's maybe you are, still working your daytime job. If you are in real estate, obviously, this is a real estate podcast, but these are the kind of little things that we kind of overlook, right? We just kind of look for the opportunities, for the deals, for the returns. But you need to focus on the little things, because the little things that you do that will help you to make sure that those big things become a reality, right? And so that's whether you are working full-time or it's also very important and possibly even more important if you are doing this full-time, right? Because it's easy to lose focus and kind of drift off a little bit, right? So I think both of those are very, very important, and I really do appreciate that you were able to share those. So I think it's time for us to switch over to our next segment of the show. And this is where we ask you a few questions. Mm-hmm. So question number one, what is a good tool, source, or platform that you can recommend to others that you have found very valuable, for performance and for life and for business? What do you think? Anything that you can think of?
Yeah, I can think of a great app. I love using Headspace, the meditation app, because it sends you reminders every day. So when I was saying earlier that people need to slow down and it's really, really hard, using the app really helps you to remember. And sometimes it just sends you a reminder that says, remember to take a breath. And so it's like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll do that. And it really calms you down. So for managing stress, managing your energy, it's a perfect way to do it. So I'm going to recommend Headspace. Okay,
perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. I'll check that one out as well.
Yeah, it's a good one.
What book are you currently reading?
I literally just finished. So I finished 2 nights ago. So I have not chosen a new book. A book called The Snow Child, and
okay.
It's a fiction book. I've been making a point of reading fiction lately because I get lost in my work books, which I love, but sometimes it's good to escape. The author is, I don't know how to pronounce the name. It's Eowyn, so Eowyn, and then her surname is Ivey, Ivey. And the book is called The Snow Child. And I actually really loved it. I surprised myself.
Awesome. And what is that book about? Like you said, it was a fictional book, but what is it about?
Yeah, it's about a couple who are in their late 40s, and it happens in the early 1900s, and they move to Alaska. And they move to a completely new territory, very, very difficult winters, and have to adapt to that. And so it takes you into the wilderness of snow and the forest and the cold. And yet the book is very poetic. And so when you read it, there's a lot of, you feel that you're there. There's the silence and the wild animals, and it's the hunting, and it just takes you away. I live in New York City. It's a whole different story. It just takes you out.
Yes. Okay, that's awesome. We'll definitely put that in the show notes. So what book would you recommend, from an audience to read? Is there anything out there that you would recommend to help improve upon themselves?
Yes, absolutely. In terms of, we were talking a lot about focus and time management. So I think a really, really good one is called Your Brain at Work. And it's a book by David Brock. And it's really all about, it's based on neuroscience and really tells you how your brain functions. So it helps, and it gives a lot of strategies to help with productivity, to help with focus, and making sure that you are working at your top performance all the time, or well, not all the time, but as much as you possibly can. So it's a really good one.
Your Brain at Work by David Rock.
Your Brain at Work. Yep. It's right here. It looks like this.
Okay, that's exactly the way I spelled it. So, last but not least, at the end of your life, how do you want to be remembered?
You know, I have thought about that a lot lately, and I think one of the most important things to my life is freedom, and that's what I really want to give to my clients. And I think when I work with them, whether it's on their transition, on the or on the challenge, it's always about the freedom of doing what they love, what's meaningful to them, what's important to them. So I hope that I'm remembered as someone who's helped others find their own freedom.
Great. I love that. So where can Commit to Wealth Nation go to contact you and find out more about who you are and what you do and what kind of services you can help them with?
Thank you. Yeah, the best way to get in touch with me is through my website. It's dominiquemoss.com, nice and easy, my name.com. And on it, you'll find events. I have a couple of events coming up for anyone who actually is in a transition, in a career transition. We're doing a talk and a get together for people who are in transition in New York City on September 7th, and it's all on my website. I also have group coaching calls that are complimentary, so people can just join in if they are interested in doing that. They can go to the website and sign up on there. Yeah, I think that's the best way to do it. Go to my website and everything is there.
Yeah, and I'll make sure to put that in the show notes so everybody can go out there and click on her link.
Thank you.
She said, there's she can have some complimentary different coaching sessions. So like that. Yeah. If you and this is I want to say this real quick before we do end. A lot of us, going back to what the show was about, at the very beginning when we talked about, a lot of us don't think that we need coaching. But we can benefit greatly from it. So, if you're on the edge, if you're thinking that you may need it and you're like, no, why me? I can do everything, or I'm good at everything. Well, I think that, you can definitely benefit in one way or another. Right. And help you get to that next level. So, definitely we'll put that in the show notes. And, so Dominique, I really do appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All the value that you shared with us, you're great. With that said, I wish you continued success.
Thank you so much for having me on, Juan, and thank you for your amazing questions. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You too.
All right.
CommitToWealth.com, creating a legacy by committing to real estate wealth.